'70s, the golden years of Grand Prix racing. Now why would I say that? Very simply, I was a part of it. For 7 years of my Grand Prix life, I raced in this period. It started in 1970 and it really wasn't much different to the 60s. But with Bernie Ecclestone, turbocharging, multi-million pound sponsorship, ground effects, and the introduction of major motor manufacturers, this sport turned into a global business, and it all happened in the 70s. When the first Grand Prix of the period took place at Johannesburg's Kyalami circuit at the start of the 1970 season, the sense of expectancy ran at fever pitch. Jack Brabham would emerge the race winner, the 44-year-old veteran of 3 World Championships, thus scoring the final victory of his career. But the new March 701s, driven by Jackie Stewart and Chris Amon, had stolen the show prior to the start, dead heating for pole position. Somehow the advent of March, a bold, brash, entrepreneurial newcomer to the ranks of racing car manufacturers, reflected the optimism of a bold new decade. Yet the Monaco Grand Prix would yield a very different result. Other circuits may have changed over the years, but Monaco's topography remained virtually unchanged since the first race was held through the streets of this millionaire's playground in 1929. In 1970, Stewart led the opening phase, but Brabham eventually squeezed ahead and seemed on course for another decisive victory with the sleek Brabham BT33. Amazingly, the canny veteran was wrong-footed when he came up to lap a slower car and slid into the barriers in the final corner of the race. This allowed Austria's star Jochen Rindt's elderly Lotus 49C to slip through and take an unexpected win. For the dynamic Rindt, this would certainly not be the last win of his 1970 season. Jochen Rindt was undeniably the fastest Grand Prix driver of his generation. I know that. I raced against him in Formula 2, and he only knew one way to drive. That was absolutely flat out. The great tragedy was that Jochen Rindt became the only posthumous world champion in the history of Formula 1. Grand Prix racing was still a wild and woolly business, and nowhere emphasized that reality more than the spectacular Spa-Francorchamps circuit deep in the Ardennes forest of southern Belgium. The 1960s may have seen the first serious steps being taken toward making Formula 1 a safer, more secure pastime. When Pedro Rodriguez set out to compete in the 1970 Belgian Grand Prix in the Yardley BRM P153, the track was still a very high-risk proposition. Rodriguez was a driver forged in the classically romantic mold. He seemed almost impervious to concerns about safety, driven onward by nothing more than a passionate enthusiasm for driving Grand Prix machinery. The Mexican was not regarded as the best driver of his era, but he was certainly the bravest, and Spa-Francorchamps enabled him to put those qualities on very public display. Sadly, barely a year after being feted after his splendid victory, the popular Pedro would become the victim of his own huge enthusiasm. He would die at the wheel of a private Ferrari in a minor league German sports car race. When the Grand Prix circus moved on to the Dutch circuit, Zandvoort, Jochen Rindt would be armed with the innovative new Lotus 72, in which he would score his second Grand Prix victory of the season. The new Lotus was slim, agile and incredibly quick, but Jochen had already been involved in too many accidents at the wheel of various Lotus for his own peace of mind. He was worried that it was too fragile. He drove for Lotus because he wanted to win, but that did not mean he was totally convinced about his sleek new machine. Before the end of the race, An ominous cloud of smoke far across the dunes hung over the scene of the fatal accident to Pierre's courage in the Frank Williams de Tomaso. Piers was a close friend of Jochen. The pain on the winner's face as he mounted the rostrum was all too obvious. In the pits at Monza, Colin Chapman and Ina Rindt knew of Jochen's concern. Poised on the verge of winning the World Championship, he went out to practice at Monza, his Lotus 72 shorn of its wings as he struggled to match the speed of the rival Ferraris. Poignantly, the afternoon ended in another tragedy as Jochen's car crashed heavily under braking for the fast Parabolica corner. Rindt did not survive the impact. He became the sport's first posthumous world champion. But life goes on. The day after Jochen died, the Italian Grand Prix took place as scheduled. Surrounded by hysterically enthusiastic Ferrari fans, Clay Regazzoni won his first Grand Prix victory for the legendary Italian team. Jackie Stewart was widely acknowledged as the finest driver of his era, but he was having a troubled 1970 season up to this point. A combination of politics and commercial expediency had seen the Tyrrell team saddled with the uncompetitive March 701. But the British car owner quickly took steps to rectify that state of affairs. Barely 6 months after Jackie raced the March for the first time, Tyrrell had built his own car, and it was up and running in time for its World Championship debut in the Canadian Grand Prix. Jackie Stewart had an outstanding Grand Prix career, 3 World Championships out of 99 Grand Prix. But on the other hand, he was very often maligned for the safety crusade he introduced just before the decade began. How wrong can so many people be? Even as the Lotus team were recovering from the shock of Rindt's death, so there was a symbolic sign of renewal to ease their sense of loss. The young Brazilian driver Emerson Fittipaldi came to Watkins Glen for the United States Grand Prix and won it. Rodriguez at one point looked set for victory, but a late race refueling stop ruined his prospects. The Mexican raced back out of the pits, scattering people in all directions, but it was too late. Fittipaldi was through and held on to score a memorable and emotional win. It was only his 4th Grand Prix. The 1971 season would belong to Jackie Stewart. The Scot had been effectively out of contention in 1970, but he would ensure that the new season was very different. Once again, the World Championship season would kick off the colourful, demanding Kyalami circuit near Johannesburg. Stewart and Tyrrell were well prepared, but this was not to be their race. After Denny Holmes' McLaren M19 dominated the field, a suspension failure dropped them from contention. That left the way clear for Mario Andretti to win in the Ferrari Flat 12. Italian-American Mario Andretti, probably the greatest all-round driver, Formula One, IndyCar, NASCAR, sports cars, you name it, he's driven it. The big question is, if Mario had focused just on Formula One, would he have been even greater than he is today? Stewart always excelled through the demanding streets of Monaco. Practice for the 1971 race took place in treacherous heavy rain. Lack of visibility and traction are obviously the two main problems. At Monaco, there is nowhere to go when one needs to pull off or park a car which has suffered mechanical failure. Despite its image as a sun-soaked paradise, Monaco has had its fair share of wet practice sessions and races. Yet it remains a uniquely challenging venue in which to drive a Grand Prix car. Stewart did a superb job in qualifying for this particular event, and even though the race itself was run in less stressful dry conditions, Stewart would certainly face his own very special problems when he finally took up his place in the starting grid. On the final warm-up lap, Stewart felt there was something wrong with the brakes in his Tyrrell. A quick check revealed that the brake balance bar had broken. This meant that he had only braking in the front wheels, but he still went straight into the lead. Monaco is hardly the place where a driver needs a car problem, yet Stewart adapted his driving style to accommodate the car's braking difficulties. Despite locking up his tyres, he kept away from the unyielding barriers for the entire distance. It was the mark of a true champion. Paul Ricard first hosted the French Grand Prix in 1971. It was a lavish new track which reflected the growing interest in Formula One racing. The 1971 French Grand Prix was dominated by Jackie Stewart, who won comfortably from pole position. It was also the first time the Tyrrell Fords scored a 1-2 success. Stewart's glamorous young teammate, François Savert, brought the crowd to their feet by finishing a brilliant second. The 1971 season was not solely about Stewart and Tyrrell. The Austrian Grand Prix was led from the start by Joe Siffert in the elegant BRM P160. Siffert was a driver in the same mould as Pedro Rodriguez, who had been his teammate at BRM from the start of the year. Tragically, Pedro had been killed in a sports car race the week before the British Grand Prix. Now, Siffert had to lead the BRM team and raise its spirits at one and the same time. On the superfast Österreich, the Swiss drove brilliantly to keep ahead of the opposition all afternoon. Stewart retired as Tyrrell, but clinched the World Championship. Siffert, nicknamed the Crazy Swiss, would die in a crash at Brands Hatch later that year. François Savert learned a great deal from Stewart, the Frenchman admiring and respecting his senior colleague. In the 1971 United States Grand Prix, the young Frenchman took over the reins to win after Jackie suffered tyre trouble. All agreed it was a well-deserved success. The influence of South American drivers in Grand Prix racing was really led by Juan Manuel Fangio, but a young Brazilian, Emerson Fittipaldi, took up the charge in 1970, and in 1972 became the youngest ever driver to win a World Drivers' Championship at the age of 25. Emerson Fittipaldi had well and truly arrived. The twisting Jarama circuit near Madrid would host the Spanish Grand Prix for much of the 70s. It was the track where Emerson Fittipaldi got his 1972 World Championship assault off the ground. The Lotus 72 had now reached technical maturity and carried him to an easy victory. Then it was Monaco time again. Rain, rain, and more rain. The race would be won in appalling conditions by Jean-Pierre Beltois in the BRM P160. It was the French driver's day of days. A BRM would never win another Grand Prix again. Jackie Stewart was off form at Monaco and seemed extremely concerned about the track conditions. He even spun a couple of times. This was most uncharacteristic and pointed to the first signs of his stomach ulcer. On the eve of clinching his first World Championship, Emerson Fittipaldi chats to his brother Wilson at Monza. Ferrari showed well in the opening stages of the 1972 Italian Grand Prix. Both Clay Regazzoni and Jackie Ickx ran strongly, but Fittipaldi was like a man who knew his time had finally come. He had developed a sensitive touch to get the best out of the little 72. When he finally came roaring out of the Parabolica to take the checkered flag, he was a well-deserved winner. At 25 years of age, he was the youngest world champion in history. The British Grand Prix 1973 at Silverstone, John Watson made his Grand Prix debut in a privately entered Brabham painted brown. But that race was notable for another young driver, Jody Scheckter in the McLaren, losing it at the end of the first lap and causing complete mayhem on the track. It also was a year in which we saw tragedy, and a potential world champion, Francois Silver, lost his life in the last Grand Prix of 1973. It also was the end of Jackie Stewart's Grand Prix career, a third-time world champion. Fittipaldi's crowning as world champion fueled the infectious enthusiasm for motor racing back in his native Brazil. When Emerson appeared for the 1973 Brazilian Grand Prix at São Paulo's spectacular Interlagos circuit, the fans could not contain their excitement. He duly delivered the result they'd been waiting for by winning the first championship round to be held on his home soil. The delight was matched by that of Emerson's wife, Maria Elena, and team owner, Colin Chapman. The cars which started the South African Grand Prix, Stewart took an immediate lead at the start, driving with all his customary controlled flair. He won the race despite a controversy over yellow flags. Nobody could have guessed from the outward demeanour that he had already decided to retire at the end of that year. Meanwhile, Clay Regazzoni had a lucky escape. His BRM crashed and burned at Crowthorne Corner, but Mike Hailwood stopped his Surtees and went to the rescue. Both survived with only superficial burns. Hailwood was awarded the George Medal for his outstanding bravery. The French Grand Prix was again held at Paul Ricard in 1973. It was a race which gave some new names the opportunity to shine for the first time in their careers. A third Works McLaren M23 had been fielded for the young South African driver Jody Scheckter. He led from the start and refused to be intimidated by the more experienced drivers in his slipstream. Eventually, Emerson Fittipaldi tried to dive inside him in a bid to pass. The two cars collided. Egos were bruised, but thankfully nothing more serious. Ronnie Peterson thus had a clear run through to his first Grand Prix win, driving a Lotus 72. My debut at the British Grand Prix was fairly quiet, but the enfant terrible of the period, Jody Scheckter, really made a big impact. In fact, it nearly put John Surtees and his Formula One team out of business. Jody went on to be a world champion in 1979, a much calmer and more at ease person than he was that day at Silverstone in 1973. The British Grand Prix is always the high spot of the country's motor racing year. In 1973, the race looked set to be a close battle between the Lotus 72s of Fittipaldi and Peterson, and the McLaren team with its latest M23s. Peter Revson and Denny Hulme were McLaren's regular drivers, but a third car was entered for Jody Scheckter after his impressive showing at Paul Ricard. Peterson's Lotus led briefly from the start, but Jackie Stewart had forced his Tyrrell ahead by the end of the opening lap. Then all hell broke loose. Scheckter came through Woodford Corner too fast, put a wheel on the grass and spun. Cars dodged in all directions, slamming into each other like pinballs. Yet nobody was seriously hurt, and amazingly, there was no fire from the car's fuel tanks. The race was won by Peter Revson. Progress had been clearly made in terms of car safety. It was something approaching a miracle that no spectators had been injured by flying debris. More would have to be done to keep up the pressure for change and improvement. Just as in 1970, the Dutch Grand Prix jarred many people in Formula One out of their complacency. Young British driver Roger Williamson was driving the Works March 731 in the race, and during the opening phase settled down to run in close company with privateer David Purley in a similar car. Then came disaster. Williamson's car crashed at high speed and erupted in flame. Purley was distraught. He abandoned his car at the side of the track, ran across the road, and sprinted to the point where Roger's car was upside down, with flames licking around the cockpit. It was perhaps the most poignant image ever produced by F1 racing. Television viewers across the world could share Purley's frustration as he struggled with the car, and his desolation when he knew the battle was lost. The race was won by Stewart ahead of Sever. Another Tyrrell won too, but at the time it really didn't seem to matter all that much. Thank goodness for people like Jackie Stewart, who did so much to bring the level of circuit safety, car safety, and a general awareness that racing drivers are not light bulbs, they're human beings. And also for people like Professor Sidney Watkins, the FIA Formula One delegate, who also has done so much on the medical side to ensure that drivers' lives, which are a danger at times, will be safely and successfully cared for. Thank you both very much. Talking of hazardous circuits, the 14-mile Nürburgring is one of the most demanding racetracks of all.
For a quick lap at the Nürburgring, you've probably experienced more in 7 minutes and 6 or 7 seconds than most people have experienced in all their life, as the way of fear and the way of tension and the way of animosity towards machinery and to a racetrack.
The court for us back was still hosting the German Grand Prix in 1973 when Stewart scored the last win of his career. Again he led Sever across the line, and again he privately confided the Frenchman was ready to win in his own right. Car and circuit safety was still a major unresolved issue in 1973, and so was organisation and administration. The 1973 Canadian Grand Prix at Mosport Park took place in lurid, wet, dry conditions, which did not simply cause chaos in the pit lane. The organisers lost control of the official lap chart and didn't even know who'd won the race.
Are you sure he won?
Initially it was judged that Hardin Ganley had won the race, driving for Frank Williams, but the confused expression on the faces of both team owner and driver were mirrored by the officials in the control tower. Finally, the organisers consulted everybody who'd managed to keep a lap chart during the course of the race. Once this forensic investigation had been completed, it was decided that the race had been won by Peter Revson's McLaren. Emerson Fittipaldi's Lotus was second, and Jackie Oliver's Shadow third. The disappointed Ganley ended up in sixth. It was a far cry from today's pit lane with its computerized timing system, which can differentiate up to 1,000th of a second. At the end of the season, Fittipaldi decided to leave Lotus and move to McLaren for 74. It was a shrewd move. Formula One is a cyclic business like many others, and when Jackie Stewart retired at the end of 1973, it left a vacuum. He was Mr. Motor Racing, a great ambassador. But truly it didn't take very long for his successors to fill his boots. Emerson Fittipaldi, James Hunt, and many more went on to become great ambassadors for a sport that grew so rapidly and became so popular throughout the 70s. While Fittipaldi made a high-profile switch to McLaren, so Ferrari's star began to rise again after a disappointing couple of seasons. Fittipaldi and his team chief Teddy Mayer knew that the 1974 World Championship would certainly be no pushover.
We know how it was, right?
I'm only dropping the wings on tiny little
Oh,
bit.
you no, but I run the car on the outside for the first time today. On the rear and
It'll be alright.
Say 30 seconds, I will get up with my flag. I will have
Niki
all
Lauda
my
moved to the
flags
Ferrari team in
and those
1974
seconds,
after a
they're on my
promising
own,
year
and I
with
use them
BRM.
immediately because I know
He'd
how
made
to
his name in the early 1970s
After
as
50
teammate
seconds.
Ronnie Peterson driving March Formula 2
I think
cars.
that's after seeing
He
two or
was
three
serious,
laps, no?
methodical and very committed.
Probably there's been a champion.
Lauda would emerge as a possible title contender at the 1974 Spanish Grand Prix. Renowned Ferrari engineer Mauro Faghieri had redesigned the 312 V3 Challenger into a seriously competitive machine over the winter. It may have been raining as Niki took his place on the starting grid at Jarama, but he was certainly not a nervous man. The New Lotus 76, driven by Ronnie Peterson, briefly held the lead in the early stages of the race, but Lauda soon asserted himself. Peterson would have to wait for another day and another car before winning again for the black and golds. As things turned out, this was to be the first of many great days in Niki's career. Helped by a well-drilled pit crew who changed his tyres efficiently at just the right moment, Niki out-fumbled the opposition to score a well-judged win. It brought Ferrari back from the cold after almost 2 years away from the winner's rostrum. And this would certainly be no fleeting success. The prancing horse was back for the long haul. By the summer of '74, Grand Prix racing was rushing forward to embrace a more overtly commercial edge. The relatively uncluttered liveries carried by cars only a few years earlier had now given way to sponsorship from outside the motor industry, overtly from the tobacco companies. Fittipaldi won his second world championship for McLaren in '74, but defending that title crown would be extremely difficult. Emerson and Teddy Mayer, McLaren's chief shareholder, knew only too well that the Cosworth Ford V8 engines used in their cars were giving away too much power to rival the Ferrari flat 12 engines. From the commercial standpoint, Bernie Ecclestone emerged in the mid-70s as the most powerful man in Formula One, owner of the Brabham team and president of the Formula One Constructors Association. He was a man with an eye for a deal. It took Bernie's perception to work out that Formula One had the potential to become a globalized television sport. Over the next 2 decades, he would work tirelessly to make the sport richer and more successful than ever.
It will now come further. Let's get all the cars back into the pits and change cars. All the cars back into the pits and change the cars. Come on.
Bernie Ecclestone bought the Brabham team in 1972, and I drove for him in '73 and then in '77 and '78. And he's an amazing person. Maybe not the best team owner, he was too much of a gambler in that respect. But really what knocks him out was his vision, the ability to look so far into the future and put together in his own mind and then make it happen what was Formula One in 1972 and what it is now as we go into the next millennium. I can't even begin to think about it. Niki Lauda and the splendid Ferrari 312T, equipped with its novel transverse gearbox, would be the class of the field in '75. Lauda won 5 races to clinch the World Championship, but was out of luck here on home soil in Austria in the pouring rain. The race was flagged at half distance due to the terrible conditions and was won by outsider Vittorio Brambilla in the mark. James Hunt, in Lord Hesketh's distinctive white-liveried 308 Challenger, made his Formula One name in '75 with this magnificent split-second victory over Niki Lauda's Ferrari in the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort. James bolted into the lead through a canny tyre change and refused to be ruffled by the Austrian's presence in his mirrors.
I think winning grows on you, makes you more competitive.
Emerson Fittipaldi moved to the Brazilian Popozuka team in '76. This new outfit was run by his brother Wilson, and there was much nationalistic passion behind Emerson's choice. Niki Lauda stayed at Ferrari, determined to defend his world championship. And that seemed to be the most likely outcome as he accelerated cleanly away to win the Brazilian Grand Prix at Interlagos early in the season. Hunt may have qualified in pole position in Brazil, but he knew Lauda was not easily intimidated. It was back to Kyalami for the second round of the title chase in 76, and Nicky once again showed how it should be done. The Austrian ace took the lead from the start and broached no challenge to his domination. Hunt finished his fighting second in the McLaren M23. He knew that Ferrari still had bulletproof reliability on the side, but he reckoned he could possibly push them into a position where they might become vulnerable. There was another dimension to Hunt's challenge. He had to establish his roots within the McLaren team. Being the new boy within one of the most famous teams in the Formula One business was not going to be an easy task. Yet James was decisive and knew what he wanted. That strength of character and single-mindedness won over the team.
2 seconds. You couldn't make that little extra bit.
No, don't worry, I was trying to make it.
Take it again. You can't. Oh, did you say that? Well, yes, I was hearing it.
In the view of the McLaren team in the 70s, the fastest man they ever had in one of their Grand Prix cars was Englishman James Hunt. His qualities of single-mindedness, selfishness, supreme fitness made him the star that he was. And in 1976, I don't think anybody could have driven a McLaren faster than he did. James had great strengths, he had a few weaknesses. I think the weakness really lay in that he couldn't accept not winning. Now, if that's a weakness, thank goodness for a strength. The Spanish Grand Prix at Jarama was one of the first turning points of the 76 season. Lauda arrived in Spain with a broken rib, and a self-inflicted wound caused by turning over a tractor on the grounds of his Austrian home. Even as much as touching a curb with his Ferrari 312 T2 left him in agony. He led the race early on, but James stalked him like a true hunter and soon found a way through. At the end of the day, James led Nicky past the checkered flag, but there was a bittersweet twist to the day. Hunt was disqualified after post-race scrutineering. The rear track was deemed to be slightly too wide. It was like being hung for a parking offence, said Teddy Mayer. That Lauda and Ferrari might be vulnerable was proved again in France, where Nicky's engine expired in a cloud of smoke. The German Grand Prix was the most crucial race of the season. Nicky's Ferrari crashed in flames on its second lap of the Nürburgring, and he was fearfully burned. The race was stopped and restarted. James ruthlessly shoved any other thoughts from his mind and channeled all his efforts into making the best of the second battle. He performed brilliantly to win what he later described as one of the best races of his career. Judy Scheckter's Tyrrell was second ahead of Jochen Mass and the other McLaren. For Lauda, the last right beckoned. Yet the Austrian soon made it clear that he was certainly not yet ready to meet his maker. Barely 40 days had passed since Lauda's accident, but he was back in racing in time for the Italian Grand Prix. Not counting the Nürburgring, he had missed just the Austrian and Dutch Grand Prix. It was a trial of strength for both men. Lauda had to steel himself to get back into the cockpit at all, particularly on the first day of practice when the rain was pouring down. Hunt was penalised for an alleged fuel specification irregularity and had to start from the back of the grid. In the race, Hunt was storming up through the field when he came up against Tom Price's shadow. Tom was one of James' old sparring partners and had no intention of giving him an easy ride. James tried to psych it out with Price going into the braking area for the second chicane. It did not come off. James ended in the gravel. Nearer the front of the field, Lauda was driving an awesome race. In the closing stages, he twice set fastest lap of the race before being pipped by Ronnie Peterson in the winning march. He finished fourth, but Lauda still wanted to keep that world championship. The final round of the championship took place at Japan's Mount Fuji circuit, a new fixture on the calendar. It rained, and it rained, and it kept on raining. The start of the race was delayed, and delayed again. Finally, a chink of light could be seen through the threatening banks of cloud. Then came the electrifying finale of quite a remarkable season. In the Japanese Grand Prix at Mount Fuji, Lauder pulled out of the race on the second lap. He'd convinced himself that driving in those conditions of torrential rain was absolute lunacy. Some people said that Nicky had taken a calculated gamble that James wouldn't finish the race. It is a harsh judgment. Nicky had nothing to prove after that incredible return to the cockpit. For his part, Hunt looked as though he had the race in the bag, only to be sent scurrying into the pits to change a deflated tyre. He resumed the chase, throwing caution to the wind and storming back up to third place behind Mario Andretti's Lotus 76 and the Tyrrell P34 six-wheeler driven by Patrick Depailler. It was enough to give him the championship crown by a single point ahead of Lauder. There was still a strong vein of sportsmanship in the F1 business in those days. Hunt made some very public remarks backing Lauder in the weeks immediately after the Japanese Grand Prix, at a time when the Austrian was being put through the mill by an unforgiving Italian press. Their perception was that he'd thrown in the towel and lost the title in the final mile. In 1977 and 78, I enjoyed the power that was supplied by Alfa Romeo in the back of my Brabham, flat 12 engine. Very quick, a bit heavy in fuel, as a result hard on tyres and certainly on brakes at the start of a race. Across the road in Maranello, Nicky Lauda and Carlos Reutemann also had a flat 12 engine. But I don't think the relationship between the two drivers was particularly good. And Nicky was suffering from dropping out of the Japanese Grand Prix the year before. Carlos was the golden boy. But Nicky soon turned things around. He was the world champion in 1977. Memories of Lauder's horrific accident at the Nürburgring lurked close beneath the surface of many drivers' minds as they embarked on the 77 season. After Lauder's accident, Ferrari signed Carlos Reutemann as de facto number one driver. At Interlagos, he won the Brazilian Grand Prix in dominant fashion. Lauder trailed home third. Many teams wished he would set the trend for the season, but not when Nicky was involved. James Hunt had finished second in Brazil, but his McLaren M23 was feeling the pressure. He needed a new car. The new McLaren M26 would arrive during the course of the year, but there would be fresh opposition coming from a totally unexpected source.
This was the first race where the Ferrari was really running quick again, and I could take the lead. And I remember when I took the lead, I was very happy.
Lauder led the 1977 South African Grand Prix from the start with the Ferrari 312 T2. Prior to the race, he had spent a week at the circuit near Johannesburg testing a Ferrari chassis setup which performed to his liking. Second place in this race fell to Judy Scheckter in the new Harvey Postlethwaite designed Wolf Ford, with Patrick Depailler's six-wheeler Tyrrell third and James Hunt fourth. Monaco again promised to be a tantalizing lottery in 1977, but qualifying proved there might be several drivers in with a chance. I qualified the Brabham Alfa Romeo in pole position ahead of Judy Scheckter's Wolf Ford. We battled for many laps in the early stages of the race. Scheckter had left Tyrrell at the end of the previous season. Now he wanted to make a name for himself without still feeling he was in the shadow of Jackie Stewart. I was also keen to underline my status in the team which had tragically lost its other driver, the Brazilian Carlos Pache, in an aeroplane accident just prior to the start of the European season. The pace was relentless. My Brabham was heavier and thirstier than its immediate rivals, but I pressed on as hard as I could. But victory at Monaco certainly was not going to come my way this occasion, or on any other, come to that. In the end, it was Scheckter's compact Wolf which emerged ahead, but Lauder's Ferrari picked up the pace in the closing stages and was right behind at the checkered flag. They needed to enjoy their own personal fun while it lasted. Lotus, on the other hand, had thoughts about future developments. I remember Monaco 77 particularly well because it was my first pole position as the Brabham Alpha. By the time the British Grand Prix took place at Silverstone, McLaren was fielding its latest car for James Hunt. The M26 was an uprated version of the M23, which had served the team so well across 3 seasons, and it was good enough for the moment. Although my Brabham Alpha took an early lead, it was James who again won for McLaren, ahead of Lauda's Ferrari, in trouble with poor brakes. The 1977 Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort again looked like a Hunt benefit from the outset. The reigning champion was still demonstrating aggressively competitive form behind the wheel. That extraordinary confidence also extended well outside the cockpit of the car, and it could get him into uncomfortable situations. As the race through the dunes progressed, so Andretti exploited the extra grip of the Lotus 78 wing car to spectacular effect. Eventually, he tried to overtake Hunt around the outside of the long 180-degree right-hander beyond the pits. From the touchline, it looked like a perfectly legitimate move, but it relied on Hunt making room, and he declined to be accommodating. The 2 cars collided and were out of the race. James returned to the pits, where he confronted Colin Chapman, the Lotus team chief, and told him exactly what he thought about his driver's behaviour. Chapman shrugged it off. To him, this was what the rough and tumble of motor racing was all about.
Listen, Colin, it's his job to get past. I'm entitled. If I'm leading a race, I don't have to give way, right? Colin, that is true. Would you ask your driver to give way? It's his job to find a way around. He's very quick. All he has to do is bide his pace and see.
Mario Andretti was becoming a more formidable Grand Prix driver with every race that passed in 1977. The Italian Grand Prix at Monza was a classic demonstration of the efficiency of the Lotus 78 concept. Mario had always wanted to win the Grand Prix in the country where he had been born. Only 22 years had passed since he and his family set out for America, and he believed with the innocence of youth that he would never see a racing car again in his life. Yet Monza would be a dream come true. James Hunt's McLaren was neither competitive nor sufficiently reliable. The Englishman retired from the race with steering problems. As Mario tore past the checkered flag across the vast expanse of the Monza start line apron, so Colin Chapman went through his favourite victory routine, hurling his black cap skywards in salute. It was a great moment for both of them, even though Niki Lauda was on course for his 2nd World Championship. But there will be much more to come in 1978.
I'm a human being like you are. There's no problem there. I don't think I'm a computer. The only difference is if I go to the race meeting, I'm there for racing. I'm not there for fun, for jokes, for enjoying myself, for traveling around the world. I go there to Argentina or Brazil or whatever, not to play tennis and to go swimming. I go there to race. That means from the first moment I arrive there, I think about my race car, I think about the race. And when I go away, I think about the next race.
I went to Monaco in 1978 with the Brabham BT46, once again equipped with the flat 12 Alfa Romeo engine. It was a good car, but a bit of a handful around Monaco. But I qualified it in the front row and went into an immediate lead after Carlos Reutemann's Ferrari, which had started from pole, picked up a puncture and had to limp round to the pits. Niki Lauda had joined me at Brabham, and we were both pretty strong at Monaco that year. But then we had to overwork the brakes during the course of the race, and that played into the hands of Patrick Depailler. Preview Tyrrell 008 eventually out-fumbled us to take the win after a good drive. Niki was 2nd after a comeback drive following a puncture, while Jody was 3rd and I was 4th. The significance of this race was the fact that the Lotus 79 made its debut here in qualifying. It was not raced, but it would not be long now. The ground effect Lotus 79 was elegant simplicity on wheels. Its lines were well balanced and had a very smooth surface area which was licked by the air both above and below. Colin Chapman had made a huge effort to keep the 2 ground effect tunnels on either side of the car as uncluttered as possible. Mario and Ronnie Peterson worked wonders with this car.
Well, for years, of course, we've all been concerned with the effect that air has when it flows over the car, and we've been trying to do our best to stop it flow under the car. What we're really trying to do is promote airflow under the car in order to be able to contour the underside of the car so it produces a negative lift. In other words, the air passing under the car helps to hold it on the road. Holds the car down, it improves the grip of the tyres on the road, improves the stability of the car, improves the safety of the car.
Just when Lotus thought they were having everything their own way, Brabham introduced the infamous fan car. This used a fan to cool the engine and create downforce by sucking the car to the ground. Nicky and I drove these cars in the Swedish Grand Prix, where Bernie insisted we qualified with full fuel loads. That was intended to throw the opposition off the scent. Our cars were visibly quicker off the corners. Our competitors complained that they spewed out all manner of dust and debris, but they were really fantastic. My race was short-lived as I was put off the road by another competitor, but Nicky told me that it was the easiest win he'd ever had. He said that he was pressing Andretti's Lotus really hard when some slower car dropped some oil and the track surface became really slippery. Mario's Lotus began to slide around all over the place, but the Brabham just seemed as though it was on rails. Mario then made a small mistake and Nicky just drove past to win. It was as easy as that. Bernie later agreed to scrap the fan car after objections from the opposition. Ferrari's new 312 T4 sustained the Italian team's competitive edge into 1979. Jody Scheckter and the dynamic young Gilles Villeneuve were the drivers, and they benefited from Michelin radial tyres, which were also used by the French Renault turbos. The influence of the motor industry was becoming an increasing factor. The 79 Long Beach Grand Prix was a Ferrari demonstration run with the new T4s. Maranello had reliability on their side. Gilles won the race from Jody, repeating the result they'd achieved in South Africa. But Scheckter kept his nerve. He could see that his teammates still made mistakes out of his inexperience. Nevertheless, it must have been difficult for Jody to have been beaten twice early in the season by his less experienced partner. Jody's precise and mature style gave him an edge when it came to the Monaco Grand Prix. He qualified on pole and led from the start. The Ferrari T4 performed well on this tight circuit, and particularly at Michelin tyres. Once the green light was given, Jody burst away into Saint-Deveau at the head of the field. Villeneuve gradually caught up during the course of the race, but the real surprise came from the new Williams FW07. Alan Jones challenged strongly, but brushed the barrier. Then Clay Regazzoni took up the chase after Villeneuve retired. The Swiss driver was close behind Jody at the flag. Clearly the new Williams was something special. The 79 season also saw the emergence of the Renault turbos, backed by the giant French car company. René Arnoux and his teammate Jean-Pierre Jabouille increasingly became forces to be reckoned with, and Jabouille won the French Grand Prix. Yet it was the Williams FW07 which heralded in a new order in Formula One. After years of struggling, Frank Williams was now poised on the edge of the big time. His designer Patrick Head had taken the ground effect philosophy one step beyond the Lotus 79, and the new car was a winner. Alan Jones and the new Williams set the pace for the start of the 1979 British Grand Prix. Frank Williams tracked the race from the pit wall as his cars threw themselves into battle with the established opposition. Carlos Reutemann was now driving a Lotus 79, but Chapman's car was a pale reflection of what it had been the previous season. Jabouille in the Renault was very quick from the start on this high-speed circuit, but the French turbo car eventually wilted and pulled into the pits. Disappointingly for Jones, a cracked water pump would end his race in a cloud of steam and smoke. That left Clay Regazzoni to win the Williams team's maiden Grand Prix victory. It was a hugely emotional moment for the patriotic Frank, as well as a sign of things to come. Over in the Ferrari camp, meanwhile, Gilles Villeneuve was perhaps pushing a little bit too hard in his bid to become world champion. At the Dutch Grand Prix, he battled for the lead with Alan Jones until a tyre failure sent him spinning into the gravel trap. Just as it seemed as though he was surely out of the race, he selected reverse gear and backed his three-wheeler onto the track. Then he set off trying to get back to the pits. He managed it, but wrecked what was left of his car in the process. It was a classic example of his refusal to accept defeat. Judy Scheckter finally clinched the World Championship with a decisive victory in the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. He was shadowed all the way by Villeneuve, but Gilles respected team orders, which prevented him from trying to overtake in these circumstances. In 1980, Frank Williams and his team would build on what they'd achieved the previous year. Their professionalism and dedication sustained that earlier momentum.
I'm a racer. I've always enjoyed it. It's all I ever really think of. I've been a driver, I've been a mechanic, I'm now an entrant. I just enjoy it so much. It's part of my life, or it is my life, and I never have any difficulty in wanting to keep going, and I can't for the life of me imagine whatever else I would want to do anyway.
What revs, Alan?
It had certainly been a long road for Williams, whose earlier cars displayed poor reliability and too often ended up parked at the side of the track. But the new Williams FW07 was something very different. Faster, stronger, and much safer.
Frank Williams' Grand Prix career almost died as tragically as his driver Piers Kerridge did in the Dutch Grand Prix in 1970. For 6 years he scratched around literally from pillar to post. But in 1976 he employed a young designer, Patrick Head, secured sponsorship from the Middle East, and employed Alan Jones to drive for him. And all of a sudden Frank Williams was on a roll. And he's still rolling. There is no more patriotic Britishman than Frank Williams. When he wins, Britain wins.
Alan Jones and the Williams FW07 represented a new generation of Formula One rising stars. They were pitted against others such as René Arnoux in the Renault and the ice-cool Didier Pironi in the very competitive Ligier. Carlos Reutemann now joined Williams from Lotus for the 1980 season. He was the team's number 2 driver to Jones, but was still a world-class competitor. After Jones and Pironi's Ligier dropped out at Monaco, he would win the race. This year Monaco was punctuated by a spectacular accident in the first corner, in which Derek Daly's Tyrrell flew over the top of its rivals. Amazingly, nobody was hurt. Standards of car construction were improving dramatically by this stage. The Williams team were highly patriotic at a time when Formula One was awash with political strife. At the 1980 French Grand Prix, Jones-Williams was pitted against the highly competitive Ligiers of Jacques Lafitte and Didier Pironi on the Paul Ricard circuit. This was one race the Williams team really wanted to win. Using larger front tyres than the Ligiers, which reduced understeer and improved front-end grip, Jones emerged from the battle ahead of the checkered flag. It was a great moment for the entire Williams team, and another major stride down the road toward Alan Jones' World Championship title. Yet there was plenty of opposition ahead. Most notable amongst these rivals was Nelson Piquet's Brabham BT49, which won the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort. Over the next few years, the disappearing rear wing of a Brabham driven by Piquet would become a familiar sight to many drivers.
As we entered the 80s, of course, the buzzword was turbo. And if you didn't have 1,000 horsepower, well, forget it. Just take the thing back home. You're not going to be in the race. And of course, with turbos came major motor manufacturers, their money, their technology, and their influence. And all this began back in the 70s. We saw what really was the end of the Blue Blazer Brigade at the beginning of the decade, ending up with high-tech, very sophisticated cars at the end of the 70s. And most importantly, the vision that saw us develop through the 70s with Bernie Ecclestone and many more, carry us through the 80s, through the 90s, and into the new millennium. And it's still growing. Talk about Jack and the Beanstalk.